Midnight Strangers, Chapter 2. Miracles did not exist, fundamentally on the basis that they were interventions by some higher power for benefit of one specific party. Miracles were not real. They absolutely couldn't be. Grian hadn't been sure of it before, but the dawning of a new day had changed his mind. It started off rather unremarkable. On the second morning since he'd accidentally aided a criminal in an alleyway, Grian woke up with a crick in his neck. It was irritating, but there was nothing much to be done about it. At the very least, he knew it wouldn't bother him at work. Grian called out sick the second he got home from his eventful evening and hadn't left the house since. It wasn't hard to figure out how he'd gotten the crick in his neck. He'd fallen asleep in an armchair in his living room, positioned strategically to face both the main windows and the door of his tiny apartment. Daylight hours hadn't been as stressful for him, but once night fell, Grian hadn't been able to do anything but worry. Sheer exhaustion had been all that knocked him out for the last 2 evenings. Had he been capable of it, he would have almost certainly stayed up. Sleep made him vulnerable. He wanted to be able to see anyone who might try to enter his apartment. And yes, the villains had left him alone last time, but those people didn't play fair. It was completely possible that they would change their minds, track him down, and end him before he had a chance to scream for help. Saving one of them gave him a bit of an advantage compared to what another poor passerby might have earned. And yet still, there wasn't any genuine stability in that idea. Moral advantages could only truly be upheld if both parties believed in them. How could a group known for their tyranny be trusted to honor morals? Ringmaster spared him once. He had no obligation to do it a second time. It was a struggle to pry Maui and Pearl off his legs where they had decided to make their beds last night. On his way out of the living room and into the kitchen, he kicked his work bag to the side. It had been resting in the same spot since his shaking hands had dropped it initially, and it was in the way. Grian mustered what little energy he had left to tuck it into the coat closet by the front door. He took a heat pack out of his kitchen's miscellaneous drawer, intent on at least easing his agitation a bit with its help. The crick in his neck sent dull, consistent pains through his body as he watched the pack spin in the microwave for a minute. Painkillers would be good too, but before he could take any, he'd need to put food in his stomach. Eating as a concept sounded pleasant, and Grian was actually quite hungry. However, persistent nausea occupied his gut recently. Once his heat pack was ready and balanced awkwardly upon his shoulder, he debated if making breakfast was worth it. He fed his cats, the 2 winding through his legs and chirping at him all the while. Toast was what he ultimately decided upon for himself. It was quick, wouldn't waste too many ingredients, should he grow weary half a bite in, and there wouldn't be any extreme flavors to further upset his stomach. He ended up eating about a quarter, just enough to justify popping a couple pills. Up until that point, the morning contained nothing of note. His plans for the day included feeling guilty about not going into work and being filled with a looming sense of dread. Unfortunately, that riveting schedule was flipped on his head the second he returned to the living room and found that it was not as he'd left it. Grian's eyes landed to the open window, his curtains rustling in the wind. His heart dropped. Slowly, he let his gaze wander to the couch, where an unwelcome guest had made himself at home. Ringmaster waved at him. "Morning, Doctor." Grian turned and walked back into the kitchen. It was too early for this. He hadn't even had a sip of tea yet, and now he was expected to deal with the most wanted criminal in the city. There was simply no way that was going to work out for anyone involved. He heard an offended gasp from behind him and a hasty shuffling, but didn't dare look over his shoulder. Grian took off his heat pack and threw it aside, resigned to the knowledge that a simple neck ache might be the least amount of pain he would feel that day. The vet dragged himself over to the stove and grabbed the kettle. He filled it with water and turned on the flame, letting it sit. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Pearl and Maui sprint from the room, food half-eaten at the sight of the unwanted guest. His foot tapped impatiently against the ground while he waited. Hello? Doctor?" Grian's nails dug into his palm, and he was forced to shove them into the pockets of his sweatpants to hide his inner turmoil. He sighed, finally facing the villain again. The true terror of the situation hadn't totally sunk in yet, so his mind allowed him a few liberties when it came to digesting the sight of the villain. Ringmaster looked a little ridiculous, standing in the middle of his kitchen in broad daylight with his hands on his hips. Contrasting to the pale yellow paint of his walls, the darkened shades of scarlet, blues, and blacks were horrendously out of place. A dingy alleyway suited this guy far better than the vibes of some random apartment. His brows were furrowed, and the sunlight streaming in allowed the vet to see that his guest sported a pair of abnormally lovely green eyes. They weren't crinkled at the moment, indicating a distinct lack of the smile he'd worn during their last meeting. Beyond that, amongst the details that were newly revealed, came a collection of scars. Discolored and stretched patches were scattered across most revealing skin. His face was the exception for the most part, though even then Grian saw a nick in his eyebrow, and right above where the gas mask covered, there was the start of what he assumed to be another large mark. If he had any more, they were hidden from view. Grian's curiosity compelled him to glance down towards where he knew Ringmaster's wound to be. The fabric of his vest had been mended, meaning nothing of the other night's issues were visible. Part of him wanted to request to see it, just to check how it was healed, and if he'd done everything right before. Presumably he had, but the light level left a lot to be desired with his recollection of the evening. To prevent himself from blurting anything unwise, Grian spoke the first question that came to mind. "Why are you here?" Ringmaster's furrowed brows moved impossibly closer, and there was a moment in which Grian wondered if he'd taken it too far earlier. Whether he'd completed his morning ritual of drinking tea yet or not, walking out on a villain was a bit of a bad call. Thankfully, he wasn't made to suffer in silence for long. "You're smart," Ringmaster sighed. "I'm sure you know why I'm here." Grian thought about it. There was really only one valid answer. To kill me, right? Despite his certainty, Ringmaster appeared completely appalled by his words. "What? Kill you? No," he scoffed. "Why would I be here to kill you?" "I don't know," Grian muttered, returning to tapping his foot against the ground. "You're evil, aren't you?" "Well, I mean," Ringmaster sputtered. "Yeah, I guess." "All right, then, if you're not here to kill me." Grian moved along. "Why did you break into my house this morning? I assume it's not for a cup of tea." "Because of your tools," Ringmaster said, eyes wide like it was obvious. Grian paused, processing. The villain, noticing his momentary confusion, elaborated. "You have my blood samples. I'm here to take that away so the police can't DNA match me." It clicked in Grian's head the second Ringmaster brought it up. The heroes had mentioned that same concept the first time he met the villain, complaining about the arrow having been wiped off and made useless. His thoughts went to his bag, tucked into his closet with everything from that night. He hadn't cleaned anything off, though the medical professional in him knew it had to be a hazard. Having called out of work 2 days in a row, it wasn't possible to access the autoclave to properly sterilize them. It wasn't done with any intention, like reporting his situation to the police. Rather, he'd involuntarily put it off due to his own anxieties. In all likelihood, he probably would have subtly used the autoclave the next time he was at the clinic without much of a thought given towards DNA samples. He'd already thrown his scrubs and clothes in the wash with a bit of hydrogen peroxide to remove the stains. However, with the dawning of this new issue, reality was impossible to ignore. He hadn't cleaned his tools, so the blood was still on them. It was evidence that a professional villain really wouldn't want floating around. "I know you've not gone to the police already," Ringmaster said. "So, before you do, I'm going to have to confiscate that stuff." "What?" Grian stood up straighter, hands leaving his pockets. "What do you mean? You want to take my tools away?" "Yeah, that's what I just said," Ringmaster confirmed. "I have to. Safety's important." "No," Grian replied. Ringmaster raised a brow. "No." "Absolutely not," Grian continued, even as the back and forth sat like a stone in his gut. He was pushing his luck, but this was not a matter he could just allow to happen. "Do you know how much it would cost to replace all of that?" Ringmaster blinked. "I don't really care." Too much, Grian said. I'd rather you cut off my hand at that point. He regretted this statement as soon as it was out. The villain's gaze seemed to darken with the mere suggestion. Cold, hard terror replaced the beating of Grian's heart. He held up a finger, trying his best to appear unfazed. The other man stared at it as though he wanted to rip it off. That was not a request, he said, suddenly nervous. The morning haze that had given him a facade of confidence faded all at once. Either way, I won't be giving up those tools. You'll just have to trust that I won't use them against you. Trust? Ringmaster's head tilted to the side. Grian didn't like the glint in his eyes. You want me to trust you? The vet lowered his pointed finger, mouth dry. Ringmaster took a step closer, taller than Grian remembered him being. You might have saved my life once, the villain hummed. He swayed nearer, leaning down ever so slightly to bring him to Grian's level. But we both know that was only because my identity was obscured. He raised a hand and let it ghost over the vet's arm, trailing up to his shoulder. It paused, hovering ominously by his neck. Ringmaster settled his hand there in the crook between shoulder and throat. The villain squeezed a bit too tightly, inadvertently aggravating that already existing ache. Of all people, Doctor, he whispered, I'm sure you understand the fear of having something come back to bite you. Grian swallowed. The villain's thumb rose to trace over the bobbing motion. You know, Ringmaster said, I wasn't planning on killing you, but this really is getting irritating. Grian glared as the villain's hand rose to tip his chin up. Yeah, I should just go through with it, the villain mused. Not like it would be hard. Grian backed up as far as he could, pushing away the touch. The counter stopped further movement. There was less than a foot of distance between him and the man threatening him. Not nearly enough space. Ringmaster reached out like he might grab Grian's wrist. To prevent any further contact, he folded his arms behind his back. Ringmaster matched his glare. Interesting. The vet swallowed, and once again, green eyes followed the movement. The attention felt dangerous, loaded, anticipatory. It weighed upon Grian's shoulders and gripped at his lungs. Slowly, Ringmaster took a step closer. Something about his attitude had changed, become more serious. Grian hadn't thought he was teasing before, but compared to his current countenance, there was no doubt in his mind that he was in genuine danger. The villain raised another hand, and this time Grian wasn't able to knock it away. It latched onto his throat, his grip not yet choking, but certainly not gentle either. The fear that shot through the vet's veins was hot and acidic. His entire body screamed at him to move, fight, do anything. Without thinking, Grian's hand shot out to the countertop beyond him, where he knew his larger utensils were kept. His fingers curled around a handle, and then he was shoving it forward, stabbing it towards the other's neck. Unfortunately for him, he hadn't been quick enough. His wrist was enveloped by a red, glowing light. It prickled along his skin, forcing him to pause mid-thrust. The very air around his appendage felt wrong, like he'd been caught in a jar of gelatin. Ringmaster raised a brow. A stirring spoon? Really? Grian cried out as the other took his wrist and twisted, causing him to lose his hold. The spoon clattered to the ground, and the villain laughed. The sound bounced off the walls of his kitchen, domineering and cold. I see that I might have underestimated your willingness to fight back. The red glow dissipated, but he wasn't given enough time to feel relieved. Without warning, Ringmaster crowded impossibly closer. Grian held his breath as arms bracketed him in on either side, and he leaned in close enough for the vet to see the flecks of yellow in his eyes. Now, Doctor, there's nowhere for you to go, he said, tone purring with the ebb and flow of his vocal modulator. Are you sure you still want to be stubborn? Their bodies were pressed together, pinning Grian in place. He could feel the other's chest against his, a hammering pulse competing with one set in a chilling, calm rhythm. He could see the other's arms and the strength that would be certain to prevent any escape attempts. He could see the other's brow raised just the slightest bit, visibly both amused and irritated by the game of cat and mouse they were playing. Grian couldn't respond. His tongue was leadened inside his mouth, his breathing shallow and his heart rate an undeniable mess. No thoughts could take root in his mind, not when terror had replaced his reason. Never once in his life had he thought he would wind up in this position, a supervillain threatening him within his own home over a set of tools. How was he supposed to get out of this unscathed? Doctor? The other tilted his head, eyes half-lidded. I asked you a question. A shiver trailed up Grian's spine. You don't? I don't want to give you my tools, Grian said, almost inaudible. He heard himself only through a ringing of his ears. Something came to him in a brief flash, an idea that might mend their difficult situation. Can't we strike a deal? Ringmaster hummed. A deal. Grian felt the rumbling words in his chest latching onto them like an anchor. The vet thought they came with a hint of intrigue, the kind that might put him in a favorable position. For the sake of survival, he needed anything he could get. Yes, a deal, he confirmed. His brain rushed to catch up with his mouth, and he said, You want my tools because they have your blood on them, yeah? What if I just wash them off? The villain tutted. I've already told you that I don't trust. You don't have to trust me. Grian's breath came back to him, sureness filling him more and more by the second. I'll wash them off in the sink right now, and you can watch. Ringmaster, for the first time since he'd let his more sinister side shine through, seemed to need a moment to process. He drew in an audible breath. A sharp whistling cut through the air, startling both of them. Ringmaster stumbled back a step or two, whatever he'd been about to say lost in the confusion. Cold air rushed to fill the space where they'd been pressed together. Grian cursed and jumped to deal with his kettle. Despite the inopportune timing, he moved on autopilot to collect the various items he needed. Black tea was his usual first drink in the morning. It helped him start his day off, and while he'd already had quite the start, habits were hard to break. Grian stopped short at his cup cabinet. He hesitated between grabbing just one or adding an extra to his run. Though it wasn't necessarily smart, he decided to outsource his dilemma. Do you want a cup? He chanced a look over his shoulder and saw that Ringmaster's countenance had resumed its earlier confusion. Do I want a cup of tea? It was stupid. The tea was stupid. Grian was being stupid. Going from being threatened 1 minute to offering tea the next was especially stupid. One of these idiotic questions or statements he kept blurting were going to get him killed eventually. Only a matter of time. Unable to do anything else, he doubled down. Yeah. Ringmaster mumbled. Sure. Grian grabbed a second cup. He went about pouring the water, adding the tea bags, and leaving them to steep for about 4 or so minutes. It was then, in that awkward moment between having something to do and not, that he decided to take matters into his own hands. The vet left the kitchen with the villain making a noise of confusion as he walked. He stopped by the closet, freed his bag, and returned. He pulled everything out and spread it along the countertop, including both clean and used tools. I'll wash and scrub these all right now, so long as you promise not to take them from me after that, Grian announced, glancing back at the villain. He hoped he appeared calm, because inwardly he was still extremely shaky. Sound like a good deal? Ringmaster hesitated. I don't know, does blood actually just wash off with soap and water? You're not, tricking me somehow, are you? Grian shook his head. There was a brief second of silence before the villain sighed. All right. Relief flooded through Grian, and he was pretty sure he slumped back against the counter a bit as his legs gave out. Thankfully, he was able to quickly recover and transfer those that he needed to be washed to the sink. Mindlessly, he set all but one tool down on the side of the tap and began. Ringmaster hovered over his shoulder, watching intently through furrowed brows. The water turned pink as dried blood was scraped away and replaced with suds by the sponge. It wasn't terribly efficient, as an old toothbrush might have been more suited for the job, but he didn't have great options around his apartment. Grian washed with a practical speed anyways, using this meticulous action, though it wasn't normally done in his home. What are these letters on the handles? Grian glanced over to see his tools being inspected by the villain. My initials, since they're my personal instruments. A lot of vets engrave their own stuff. Ringmaster said, adding under his breath, I guess I see why you might not want to lose them. Grian decides to take that as his one win of the day and carried on. As he finished washing, he put the wash tools in the drying rack. Sanitizing and fully sterilizing would be done once he had access to the proper cleaning supplies and the autoclave at work. They weren't up to the clinic's standards until then. The whole process was fairly fast, given that only a handful of instruments had been utilized 2 days prior. It was the perfect amount of time to kill while waiting on the tea. He took out the bags and sipped his cup to check if it was ready, and decided that to be the case. The black tea's rich flavor rolled over his tongue, solidifying into clarity and energy within his brain. Grian enjoyed the depth of the taste. However, he recognized that his guest might be less inclined to enjoy something that a lot of people consider to be bitter. The vet grabbed a spoonful of sugar and mixed it into the second cup before passing it to Ringmaster. Perhaps the added sweetness would tamp down any ugly feelings the villain still had towards him. Having only just reached a consensus, Grian figured it was good to have a contingency plan, however superficial they might be. The villain stared down at the cup, brows furrowed and a baffled tint to his gaze. He looked between Grian and the drink several times before he voiced something the vet had not considered. I can't drink this with my mask on. Grian frowned, silence falling on the room. Oh, right. So much for gathering whatever favor he could from the guy. Sorry, Grian said, though he couldn't fix the situation. He took a remorseful sip. No, it's my fault, Ringmaster replied, shaking his head. Awkwardly, he reached past Grian to set the tea down again. I just should have considered that before, accepting. His switch-up was disorienting. The vet knew he was partially to blame for the sudden changing of stakes, but to see someone shift as Ringmaster had in the last few minutes was hard to fully comprehend. Grian didn't understand how one could go from threatening another's life to acting embarrassed about not drinking tea so immediately. Uncomfortable quiet filtered in around them, interrupted by only the slight clinking of Grian's cup against its saucer every now and again. Anyway, Ringmaster began. Your tools, they're totally clean? Yes, Grian assured him. I'll sterilize them completely at the clinic, but if the police were to test them now, nothing would be found. Of course, Grian didn't tell him that this was a mindless speculation. With the existence of superpowers, it was impossible to predict what the agency and the police department had under their belts when it came to tracking down criminals. They could have contacts that could turn back time on certain items or pick up on microscopic spots that were missed. Maybe soap and water weren't enough alone to get rid of the bacteria in this day and age, but he was fairly confident it would get the villain off his case at least. Grian didn't need to dwell on the specifics of forensics for a matter like this. Ringmaster took a deep breath and muttered something. Grian frowned, leaning closer. What was that? I'm sorry, Ringmaster blurted, squeezing his eyes shut. I probably should have suggested we just do that from the start instead of... He trailed off, and over the top of his gas mask, the vet thought he could see a spreading blush. Grian finished his sentence for him, threatening to kill me. Yes, that, Ringmaster said sheepishly. Sorry about that. Grian nodded and took another sip of his drink. He didn't outwardly accept the apology, though. It'd take a lot more from the guy to earn any sort of forgiveness after the sheer amount of back-to-back heart attacks he'd been given. If Ringmaster was bothered by this, or if he didn't even noticed, he didn't say anything. Consolation and reconciliation seemed less necessary to him than just the act of getting the apology out. When silence settled on them again, the villain cleared his throat and started towards the open window in Grian's living room. Grian followed him half-heartedly, watching him go. He'd be installing different locks on every possible entrance the second this guy left. Ringmaster swung one foot out, but paused in that odd position to look over his shoulder. By the way, thank you. Grian glanced up at him, surprised. Thank you? For what? For saving me the other day, Ringmaster specified. I never said anything, but without you I probably would have been caught. No, Grian argued, scoffing. You had a way to call your teammates. They would have been able to come and get you, I'm sure. They were still fighting when I was knocked out, Ringmaster said, and even if they could have come to get me, the heroes didn't vacate the area until they thought I was gone. Superpowered or not, it'd be difficult for my friends to fight them off and get me to safety. Grian pursed his lips. He knew the villain was likely telling the truth. His story added up, and his eyes didn't look guilty at all. At this moment, with no one else watching and a tentative understanding between them, Ringmaster didn't have a reason to lie about the events that had already occurred. Still, it felt like a trap. To be given his apology and his thanks in such a short span of time had to be a trap. Maybe Ringmaster was trying to lure him into something, waiting for verbal confirmation that it was all right, and Grian didn't mind the fact that he accidentally aided a criminal so he could be turned over to the cops himself. Instead of letting his fears win, he found a compromise, and nodded. The villain was appeased, and in the next second he was gone. Grian glanced out the nearest window to see if he could catch a glimpse of Ringmaster leave, but there was nothing besides empty air beneath him. For the second time, Grian had escaped a personal encounter with the city's most wanted villain, and lived to tell the tale. That evening he slept in his own bed, woken only twice by nightmares. In those moments where rest was impossible, he let himself search up new home security systems. Upon discovering that most systems were egregiously expensive and not nearly enough to keep out an intruder that really wanted in, he turned back over and fallen asleep again. The villains had no reason to come back, so Grian opted not to stress himself over nothing. The next morning, when he arrived at work, he went through the proper process of sanitizing his tools and putting them in the autoclave. One of the clinic's other vets, Skiz, pulled him aside once he was done. "What you doing, bud? What's up with your stuff?" Skiz inquired. "I thought you'd been sick these last few days. You weren't doing house calls still, were you?" From anyone else, it might have been delivered with a bit of an attitude and come across as invasive questioning. But Grian knew the other man well. He was a softy at heart with no hidden motives, which was what made him so good at his job. Skiz was sincerely curious as to why his coworkers' instruments were dirtied when he'd left with them perfectly clean before. "No, Skiz, don't worry," Grian replied, shooting him a smile. "I found a stray cat on the side of the road. Just thought I'd help it get back on its feet. That's all."